So, I've got, let go, tabs set on my paper. The next thing I'm going to do is position the block. So I use these lines I've drawn, kind of centering the block. So I've got my border going to be even on each side. And again, I put the image on the block just like I showed you when we did the skull. Now I've got paint on it. But I did a Xerox of my drawing. Well, I did the drawing initially actually did it in Photoshop so I could do colors. And it gave me, you know, having Photoshop is like having a whole group of colored markers, which works really good for this. So you can decide where you're going to do colors. But I just did the outline in Blackmagic marker and then put the citrus strip on the back just like we did, ran it through the press, and that transferred the drawing down onto the block. The thing to remember about that, unlike the dry point, it's more like a polymer plate in that because of the way we shot the plate, your image ended up reading exactly the same way as your initial drawing, right? Instead of reading backwards because you flipped it twice. Transferring your drawing in this manner does the same thing. It flips it twice. So your print is going to read exactly the same as your initial drawing. Like if you look at this, this is my drawing. The block actually has the flower facing the opposite direction. So when it prints, it'll be backwards from that, so it'll match the drawing. So what I did when I cut that 2-inch block or 2-inch strip to put the metal pins on, I had some, like it was longer than I needed, so I cut some of what was left over into these little 1-inch by 2-inch tabs. And what I'm going to do, sorry about that, is keeping my block in place. I'm going to slide them right up against the side of the block. Make sure they fit snug all along their whole length. And I'm only going to use 3. Like if I put them all the way around, that becomes more, it actually can inhibit the registration a little bit. Because the odds of all of them lining up exactly each time, you know, being perfectly square, pretty slim. But what I'm going to do with this, whoops, slide it. Is once these dry, if I can stop messing with them, when I print, I'm going to slide the block up against the 2 side ones, so it's flush against those, and then slide it forward up against this tab. And if I do that each time, if that block is in, because the pins are exact, you know, that the paper is going to snap in exactly the same place each time. So if your registration is off, it's usually because your block was not up against your stops correctly. You maybe kept it back a little bit from the top one, or it got a little crooked, or something of that nature. But if you're careful, this should keep everything lining up exactly. And you're going to keep this through the whole process. So once the glue sets up, because the glue allows me to kind of slide them around and make sure they're in the right spot. Once the glue sets up, I'll go back and I'll put packing tape over the top of these tabs also. For the same reason that I'm going to reinforce it on these metal ones up here with additional tape, because I don't want any of this to pop off in the printing process and have to go back and refine my registration. See if I can get this out of here and not move anything. So you have something just like that. If you're left-handed, you might want to put these two on the other side. Like I put them like this because I can just, if you're right-handed, I can just sort of slide it in up against them. But if you're left-handed, you want to go, I'd want to go this way with it. Question? But this is the first step. Well, getting your image size is the first step, but then this is the next step. This is still a little damp, and I want to show you how to carve it, or how you're going to carve it. Let me set this off to the side. When you start carving, I'm going to give you a bench hook, and this goes on the table wherever. If you're carving at home, you can take it home with you, but it goes up against the table edge like that. And what that allows me to do, and I don't want to carve a lot on this yet because it's too wet. So my paper is going to be white, or kind of an off-white. So I'm going to carve, the first thing I'm going to carve is anything that's going to stay the white of the paper, because it's not going to have any ink on it at all. So the bench hook allows you to carve without having to put your hand in front of it. And the fact that I've put that blue down allows me to see exactly where I've cut. And then as you cut progressive colors, you're going to stain these. Like if I say I printed a light blue or something, I think it's going to be pink. It's going to be my first color. But that pink is going to get in this cut and kind of stain it a little bit. So then when I cut for the next color, I'll be able to tell the difference also. You can always tell your new cuts. To sharpen the tool, we have sharpening stones, but we're not going to use those unless the edge of on the tool gets really dull. Because a lot of times you can actually take the edge off of a tool if you're a little off on a stone. The way we're going to sharpen them is, this is where your piece of leather comes in. You take the compound and you put a good amount on the leather. You rub it in so you get sort of that nice yellow. You can see the compound on the leather. And then you're just going to, like, this is a curved gouge tool. So to sharpen that, I'm going to start with it tipped one way. And as I pull it, I'm going to start spinning it and rotate it the other way. So like have a S shape. And I'm holding it at the angle that's already in the tool. And what this does is hone that tool. And I'm pushing fairly hard. So all these little gray lines you're seeing is actually metal being removed from that edge. But it's doing it very subtly. It's not like a sharpening stone where you go in and you're taking a lot of metal off. But this is a good way, especially with the curved tools, to sharpen them. If a tool's, hopefully this does it. If a tool's really sharp, when you're cutting, you'll see a little curl come up of the wood. Like it won't, it's not going to be little chips, but you'll actually see it curl up from the blade. That's when you know your tool's nice and sharp, if it does that. But make sure you use the bench hooks. And I have different sizes depending on what size. Because what will happen if you don't use the bench hook is you'll end up holding it like this. And when you hold it like this, your hand is always in front of where you're pushing with the tool. So eventually what's going to happen is you're going to gouge yourself. And not to get too morbid about it, but these tools are made to remove material, right? It's not like an X-Acto blade or a knife. They're meant to take large, so it does the same thing to skin. And it's always a dull tool, but not always.